The following video took place on Friday the 30th of March. It included a visit by Tony Belas and Mark Camoccio to the Tinsley Park range. This has been organised by Rob Taylor. The club has been good friends with Tony Belas for the last few years since he worked at Daystate, and the plan was for Tony to come up to the club, talk about the history of the electronic trigger systems, a bit about Daystate and about the new company he's involved with Sterling. And he brought 4 of his rifles up to show the branch members and gave us a really good talk for a good 45 minutes. So what you'll see in the following video will be interesting if you've not heard it before, and as usual it does a great talk. So we'll carry on with the video.
Yeah, Tony's going to give us a talk.
Yeah, I was a seat there, Tony. Look.
Have you got a table?
Yeah, we'll sort your table out.
Ironing board would be great.
You can do the ironing at the same time.
Official the Tinsley Park Shooting Club ironing board table.
I've got one here. Use this table.
Whose table's that one there?
That'll do. Great.
You got a picture on it?
Yeah, that's one probably gets He's very good.
Yeah, Tony's going to give us a talk on the early years of Daystate electronics and how it was devised and started, and moving on to Sterling armaments.
I thought you were going to give us a demonstration on our tiny shirt.
Yeah, all the creases.
Oh, I'm not even...
No, you're alright.
Oh.
I'm sitting at the back, so
That's got your attention, hasn't it? Semi-retirement to do it, but I'm here now. So really I just thought, you've been very kind to me over the years. We've had a great friendship between us. He's always been very supportive of both when I was at Daystate and now that I'm working with Sterling. So I thought I'll come down, give Rob his new toy, and at the same time talk you all through what happened with electronic air guns. So you can ask questions at any time. This is not something I've ever done before, so so it'll be off the cuff. But basically, Daystate was a company that started in 1978. It originally started making tranquilizer guns for a guy called Don Lowndes, and he was a bare-knuckle boxer, gypsy, entrepreneur, and he was getting on a bit in his 40s, so it's not really getting on a bit, is it? But he was getting on a bit, and he was deciding that he wanted to retire, and he had a herd of deer, and he was looking for a tranquilizer gun. He couldn't buy one, so he decided to make his own. And that led him down a path of converted rimfire rifles, Bruno rifles, and other types of weapon. But they fell on a guy who was basically doing compressed air guns, conversions from Sharper Novas in the sort of mid-70s. And he later on went up to start up Ripley rifles. But at the time, he was doing all sorts of bits and pieces, and he converted one of his air guns into a tranquilizer gun for them, and they were producing these 1s and 2s on a farm in Ashbourne in Derbyshire. One thing led to another. They formed a company, they picked a name called Daystate off a sheet of names apparently, and off they went and they produced this company. It rattled along for a few years, and then they managed to get some military contracts for tranquilizer guns. They were into the early days of paintball guns. They were doing all sorts of guns, and their air guns pretty much drifted away. And I suppose if you looked at Daystate around the early 80s, there really wasn't a lot happening between sort of 85 onwards till about 95, when they started to look back again at some air guns and doing some development. But again, it was the paintball guns which were keeping them interested. I joined in 2000, and really they were on their knees. It was a bit sad. They'd lost a lot of their contracts. Mayhem were doing their paintball guns, weren't doing any more of the guns, and they were buying them from China. And I basically went into a company that was owing a small fortune. The debt was being called in by the bank, and there was one point I thought the job might last a day. So it was quite iffy at that point. But we kept at it, and we sort of moved things up a bit and got things going. It was all very hand to mouth in the early couple of years in 2000, 2001, 2002. In 2002 we were gaining enough momentum to start to develop a proper magazine gun. And the story goes that we were developing a gun with a Theoben style magazine, but at that point the Theoben magazine was still under 25 years, so it was probably still in patent, and it had a patent number on it. And I was trying to hone in on this patent, and I called the patent agent and he couldn't find it. It wasn't registered Theoben. So I rang Theoben, spoke to Ben Taylor and said, can Daystate license the Theoben magazine? And the quote back was, it would be a bloody silly thing, Tony, if I was to spend all that money on a patent and let you make it. The answer was no. So I then thought, right, patent's got to be in another name. I wonder if it's a bluff. A lot of people bluff patents, expensive thing, you see. So I rang my editor, because I was still writing for Shooting Sports at the time, Pat Farry, and said, Pat, who made the magazine for Theoben? Because it's not registered in their name. He said, oh, it's Steve Harper. So I rang Steve and I said, Steve, did you do the magazine for Theoben? No, he said. The name actually was Steve Lilly, and Pat Farry got it wrong. So I said, oh, not being a rude type of guy, I said, oh, well, are you all right? And he said, yeah, I suppose so. I'm a bit sad. My business partner died at Christmas. This was in February. And I don't really know what to do. And I said, oh, all these fantastic electronic designs that you have that your partner Pete wouldn't allow to go anywhere. He said, that's right. I said, would you be interested in licensing them to Daystate now that Pete's gone? He said, well, I haven't really thought about it, but I suppose I could. Would 9 o'clock tomorrow morning be a suitable time to come and see you? And that's how Daystate got into the electronic air rifles. When we got down, and there is Steve Harper. So there we are. We have a Steve Harper egg. We're celebrating being Easter Friday. So Steve Harper, and that's actually that picture was taken exactly when we started this discussion. So these period pictures.
5 minutes ago.
So in 2002 we were in Steve Harper's house, myself and this gentleman. This is Rob Thompson, who was the foreman of Daystate at the time. And the pair of us went down. We met Steve at his house in Gorcott, and he showed us his magnificent CDT rifles and pistols. And the period rifle that he was making at the time was this gun here. But we didn't see that, because how Steve worked is he made the rifles, pistols, and sold them. So all we saw were the early development stuff from a rotary style Wolf pistol and a few other prototypes of carbine. This one was out with its proud owner, and we didn't see it on the day. So we developed a CDT system basically from the Harper Wolf pistol. We actually made 13 pistols to get to trial the concept. And they were shipped mostly off to the States. I think we kept one back in the museum. And then we did a gun called the Mark III A-type. Now the Mark III was quite funny. We were already doing a Mark III Huntsman, and we had already made parts and bought the wood from an American company. So the stocks were already in production, and all the mechanical parts were either delivered or in production. And then we gave Harper an air rifle, I don't know if you've ever heard of a gun called the Harrier SE. The Harrier SE, we gave him one of those, a little XL version of it, a little short version, and it went to him in 177 doing 11.5 foot-pounds, 20 to 25 shots. It came back a week later with the electronics in. It was now doing 13.5 foot-pounds and did 96 shots. Same gun with being converted to electronics. Stunning. The consistency wasn't so good, and we had a regulator from our Mark III Huntsman, so we decided to pop that into the electronic gun to build the consistency right, and we then took all the parts, we hybrided the two schemes, and we made the early Mark III A-type. And if you ever come across an A-type, it's got a light at the back, like this one, and it has a gold trigger blade, and that's how you can tell it. And they have two PP3s in the front end of the stock, so if you take the stock off, be careful to destroy it with all the harness. You don't see them very often, and they're probably coming quite a collector's item. But the engineering involved and the mechanics involved in making that gun were absolutely murder. They were all hand put together. We allowed all the engineers to do free rein, which is something you really shouldn't do, basically to develop the gun as they were making it, which meant that they were spending a lot more money than they should be. All the components were top rate, and we were making this gun. And we made, I think, about 160, 170 of these when we realised that we were in deep trouble. They took too long to make and the components were too expensive. So we rang Harper up, actually within 2 weeks of starting, and said, Steve, we're in trouble. He said, I know. It takes too long to make, doesn't it? Yes, it's the Bitzer gun. It's got wires all over the place. It's a beautiful gun to shoot, but we can't carry on like this. And he said, yeah, I'm already working on a redesign. And the working on redesign was this. So this was the CDT-B, the B type of the electronics compressed discharge system. This is an early knackered unit I happen to have kicking around, so I thought I'd bring that down so you could see it. They went from B, B1, B2, then we went C, D, E, F, G, H, and I think we're on an X board, or the Daystate is on an X board now. That is a board that will fit all guns. So the final board is designed to go into retrospectively fit all guns. As the models went through, they were pretty much designed to go on that particular gun. So it became a bit of an event to try and work out what you could fit to what when something came back broken. Steve Harper was joined by an electrician called David Snook. David did all the electronics and still does all the electronics to this day. So it was designed on a frame rather than a box because the big capacitor was too deep to go into the stock if it was in a waterized box. So the idea was that this was conformally coated, basically painted with the conformal coating and then sprayed. They had problems really from the start, not with the boards going, but with the switches going. The water tended to run down and sit on the switch. So a water drain groove, and I don't know if this one's got one, yes it has, a water drain groove was milled in on the back to allow the water to run through. In the early days, everybody was saying these guns, you know, what happens if it rains? Well, the first winter that we did this was 2002, and 2002 was one of the wettest winters for 40 years. We weren't too worried about what happened to rain. We worried what happened if the sun came out, because we hadn't actually tried it in bright weather. And when we got to California, we thought it might all melt. But it worked fine in the sun, but we did see a few problems with the rain. So we improved the waterproofing. We did a couple of famous trials. We put one in a fish tank for the IWA show, which broke, which is not what we were trying to prove. But the flashing light still was on, so we plugged in a battery charger and let the light flash, and nobody ever asked the question, does that thing work? But it lasted a day, and then it's a 3-day show, and it failed for the remaining 2. So we had a yellow flashing light for the remaining 2 days. When we came back, we found that the engineer hadn't actually conformal coated the board at all, because he had been told it was being used as a demo. So it wouldn't have any waterproofing, still lasted a day. The second thing we did was all the phone calls on the electronic guns were, will this work in the rain? What if it rains? What happens? You know, will it break down? And we were getting fed up with this question. So another little stunt that we did at Weston Park is I said to our pet shooter at the time, a guy called David Baines, said, I'm going to put a gun in the lake at Weston Park. I'm going to demonstrate it. And I spoke to Harper and I said, I don't want you cheating, but that gun needs to work in complete immersion. So just check it over. Picked the gun up, and we had it in the box, and then we forgot about it. And then David Baines turns up at Western Park and he says, "I'm ready." "What do you mean you're ready?" "I'm ready to go in the lake." and by the way, I've told all my friends, and there's all these journalists here with cameras, and they're all ready to film it. And I'm like, I wasn't so sure if we were going to do this, but okay, let's do it. So I went and borrowed a set of chest waders for him from Garland's, and he put those on, and we walked to the lake with all these ducklings behind us, all weather cameras, all excited. And as we were walking towards the lake, he says, "How deep is the lake?" And I said, "I have no idea. It's just that I can't swim." So we're heading towards a lake with a gun. We've got no permission to use it, and I've got a guy who's going to go in the lake, waddling along, and he can't swim. So, "Well, if you get into trouble, wave your arms around and I'll come and get you." I wouldn't, of course, but no way am I going to be a dragon monster guy like him out of the lake. But he went in. I said, "Well, go in as far as you can go till it gets to about knees, and then kneel down so it looks like it's waist height. So if you get into trouble, you can just stand up. Fire the rifle under the water, and then when it stops working, don't go, 'Oh, it's stopped.' Go, 'That ends my demonstration,' and walk out and disappear into the woods, and I'll catch up with you in half an hour." So that was the plan. He went in the lake, he fired it under the water, he stood up, he went down, he fired it under. He said, "What do you want to do now?" I said, "Leave it on the bottom, stand up, and then go down and pick it up." He put it on the bottom, he stood up, and he couldn't find it. And, and his waders are now full of water because he'd had to crouch down the water desperately trying to find this gun. He pulled it up, it's all covered in weeds and rubbish and covered in mud. We took it to the lake, we took a picture of it. Everybody went away, all happy, and we walked back to our tent. We got back to the tent, I thought I'll just switch it on and dry the barrel out. Didn't work. But there was nobody there, so we got away with it. So that was the waterproof demonstration. Of course, it all backfired on us because as soon as everybody saw it in the magazines, they said, "Oh, they cheated." There's a little bit of truth in that, but it was still pretty good. It was a good demonstration. We developed the B-type, C-type, and onwards, and but as we carried on with development, we started adding other bits, other features. And one of the features we wanted to add was an electronic regulator. We'd had a discussion on day one with these guns of can we map the actual firing cycle of the gun and put a pressure gauge in there, and the pressure gauge looked like a polo mint actually in its raw form, and it was used a lot in car engines as a sensor, pressure sensor, and used to develop engine speed and combustion pressures. Made by a Swiss company, pretty new technology at the time. Now it's old hat, everybody has it. And we then potted it into a special unit which we hand turned, and then we hand mapped a gun. And there was three of us in Harper's workshop with notebooks and pens, and we were firing a shot, bang, and we were changing the strike until we got to the exact measurement that we needed, and we recorded it. And it took 2 days to map a gun. And we realised that we weren't going to be able to make this gun in any form of cost effectiveness. So we launched the gun without the CDT system, even though the first press releases said it was in there. Nobody seemed to notice that we sort of got it wrong. And then we went back to it, and by this time David Snook has said, "I've thought of another way of doing it. Instead of adjusting on voltage, I'll adjust on the strike rate of the solenoid coming forward. I'm going to call that lean charge." So we put lean charge in the guns from 2005, and then we carried on then developing this digital pressure sensor. And again, we went back to the workshop, but now we could work, we had 32,000 possible combinations of strike. So we could, it was about 4 or 5 bits or microseconds to a foot per second. So we could actually, if the pellets were good enough, we could actually creep up in points of a foot per second. And if you were running on a nice string, if you wanted 780 feet per second, you could go 775, 778, 780.02, take it down a bit and get to 780. That would be, obviously the pellets weren't that good, but we could actually do it. If you had a run of good pellets, you could actually get it that close. And then we mapped it all out, and it was sent to a guy who was a Cambridge University professor, maths professor, to work out the calculation So we only had to do the bottom of the charge and the top of the charge and then map it between the two. So the computer system was able to then work out what the different pressures were between the two. This was map compensated technology. And if you've got a Mark IV, or what else, what have we got round here? Have we got a Mark IV to hand somewhere? I did see one.
I put mine away.
Oh, right, okay. Well, the Mark IV has got that in there. So Mark IV has got the what we call the MCT system, so CDT in this capacitor discharge system, and then the map compensated technology, MCT, into the Mark IV. At the same time, the company was doing rather well. Profits were wonderful. We'd gone from being a shoestring organisation. The original Mark III was developed on a total cost of £15,000, which is remarkable when you look at the Pulsar, which cost about €250,000. You've got something like that. So this is a Mark IV, and this has got MCT, and you can see you've got the Harper patterns on the side and map compensated technology on the side, and that has a pressure sensor in there that actually measures the pressure in the air tube, and pressure and temperature are obviously combined. As the temperature goes up, the pressure increases, and therefore the map will then readjust the strike. So it shouldn't matter if it's hot or cold, it should not vary so much, which is something that can go wrong with regulators.
Can you stick that in my camera?
Yeah, the regulators tend to suffer a little bit with hot and cold and gas reactors. I'm finding out. Yeah, sure.
A regulator being temperature sensitive.
There's the low pressure area is temperature sensitive, so you're running a low pressure system, so it tends to be more temperature sensitive. But the consistency is so good, people don't really worry about it. It doesn't tend to it goes up linearly, doesn't it? It goes up slightly and stays there.
So
and you get an egg for that question, so you, you get a Steve Harper egg. There you go.
Tony, you know the new rifles that are coming out with the Daystate, we've got regulators. Is that more demand than necessity?
I think so, yes. I think it's because the American market, it's very true when you're in America, has it got a regulator? It's almost the first question you got. When you say no, you're then on your back foot to try and get the guy back on stream. And of course all the FX, which is outselling Daystates mostly in America, and all the other guns, and some of these £300 or £400 guns now got regulators. It's a big sales feature. So it's a very difficult thing. You don't want to be explaining to everybody why you don't need a regulator, so I get that. And they do have advantages, and they do work with the electronics, and they do work with the slingshot system to improve it slightly. But then you've got that reliability. You know, you've got that extra device which has got to hold back, 4,200 psi of air, meter it down to 1,000 psi in a microsecond, and do it for the entirety of its life, with dirty air and dust and grit and all sorts of things which go inside these guns. So, they do go down. But the idea was actually that's why there's two pressure gauges on there. One to show you the pressure gauge in the tube, and one to show you the regs working. Because everybody who's got a regulator will be going, the regs come down, and now you can actually see if it's working. So back to the Mark IV, there's this capacitor discharge in there. It measures the pressure sensor. At the same time as we did this, the company was getting ready to be sold because the owner was hitting his 60th birthday and saw pound notes in the sellability of the company and decided he was going to retire and sell Daystate to do it. So he sold the company, and I was involved in that, though I had a few weeks at Air Arms as a break. It's a long story which I'm not going to go into here. And then came back and helped sell the company to Italian Marocchi, who then bought the company, and really from that point started to climb it up by using a lot of Italian parts and Italian know-how and design to bring it on to the next level. Before he got there, to make the company even more sellable, it was going to be sold to BSA for quite a long time. We absolutely should have gone to BSA, but BSA would have closed it down in Staffordshire and probably moved it to Smallheath. So we felt that was not a good reward for everybody's hard work, so we focused on trying to get it to somebody who was going to leave it in Staffordshire, and we achieved that, and everybody kept their jobs while they wanted them. And then the Italians took over, and we moved on up, and we carried on up. The gun we developed as part of the sale was an MVT rifle. Has anybody ever seen one of those? Grand Prix, a few Airwolves?
I've seen it here because I've got the Airwolf MVT.
Oh, I've got an Airwolf MVT, the one which we sold you.
That's right.
So the MVT had a chronograph built in the end.
Oh,
So you've got MCT, and on top of that you've got a chronograph in the end. And when we were developing that, Rob Thompson said, this is never going to work. He said the lead dust that comes off the pellets is just going to foul the chronograph up. And so I'll do a random number generator, 780, 781, 777, and just run it through a program of cycles, and nobody will ever know. And he said, no, I can't do that. They want to have a chronograph in there. So we carried on developing it. We made 5. We had a guy who was sort of helped us on the ranges, and he just recently made redundant. So he was looking for something to do. And he lived in Scotland. So we sent all 5 up to him in Scotland, and he spent the entire summer testing these guns, shooting thousands and thousands of rounds, sending them back, checking them. And they never broke. Absolutely fantastic. The whole thing about the lead dust thing didn't seem to have a problem. We used pellet lube to see if we could turn it into a gunk. Didn't seem to have a problem. So we launched the gun in the new year. They all went out and they all came back. All broken with lead dust, swirl, all the problems. Every single one came back. Wiring problems, lead dust problems. It kept us really working for 6 months to fix this flipping gun. What had actually happened, and hindsight is a wonderful thing, is they'd made all the prototype chronographs in 2.2. But when the orders came in for the actual production, everybody wanted them in 177. So the chronograph design in 177 had smaller holes. And it worked with small holes. It required a swirl to keep the chronograph screens clean. And when you made the hole smaller, the swirl wasn't enough to keep the screens clean. So they all fouled up. And we didn't sell enough 2.2s to notice that the 2.2s were working and the 177s really were, until it was too late. So we put 2.2 chronographs in all the 177s, and they're still working most of them to this day. That was really up to the MVT. And then moving forward from that, really, they moved into the Pulsar. Pulsar electronics were what we call GCU, Gun Control Unit, and that was just a renaming because we wanted to move away from the CDT, MCT thing. But it's a very similar set of electronics. What most people don't know is that around about 2008, we approached BSA and said, would you like an electronic gun for BSA? Because we need to sell more guns. And these 2 people are being paid on royalty, and they're not getting enough royalty. So to keep them interested, we would like you to make an electronic BSA. And they were very interested, and Daystate, mostly Snook and Harper, paid for the project themselves out of their own pocket. Daystate came with a little bit of engineering, but mostly it was all paid for by the 2 entrepreneurs themselves. And at the end of the project, we went back to BSA and we said, right, we've done it. New set of electronics. We had to make the electronic system, I can give you that back. We had to make the electronic system narrower because it was going on to a BSA Ultra, and a BSA Ultra has a thinner tube, and we couldn't get that capacitor in to the thinner tube. So we used 3 smaller capacitors to narrow the depth down, and that gave it a lower profile. And it occurred to us that if we wanted to at that point, we could actually put it in a box on the standard Daystate, because now we've reduced the width. But we didn't. We made it for BSA, and we went to a planning meeting just as the Italians were taking over for the company. CD Europe was taking over, and probably about a couple of weeks before, but it was quite close. And they had a planning meeting, and it all went quiet. And I think what happened is that their chief designer, John Balkett, felt that he wasn't going to make any money out of this. So it wasn't going to be something he was going to endorse. So they went quiet. Then CD Europe took over Daystate, and they weren't happy about BSA having electronic guns. So it all faded away. And but that unit, which had been developed at the expense of Harper, mostly David Snook's expense, sat in a drawer in a workshop. And when they wanted to produce the Pulsar project, they were able to just bring it out the drawer and say, here we are, here's my bill, I've done it. They did it sort of 5 years before, but it was unpaid for. Hello, Mark, you're right. You just arrived on time. No, it's perfectly all right. It's hard to find, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah, that was the last bit.
So that's how really the Pulsar came about. They'd already done it, and because the capacitors being shallower, they were able to fit them into a proper box. That was actually not done by Steve Harper. That was done by Adriano Nodari, who's the Italian designer. He came up with that, and it was a great improvement. But the electronics in there were already developed, so it was already done. So that takes us really to the end of CDT development. The Red Wolf and the well, that is really the pulsar electronics put in to a conventional gun, so they're able to reuse all that development time and money into a conventional gun, and that's pretty much where they are. They have other projects on electronics, but of course can't talk about this because that's their business. Yeah. But when I left Daystate, I wanted to originally didn't want to do any PCP. I wanted to do spring guns, and we had 2 development spring guns for Sterling. I'll show you that, Mark, when you at the end. That's the it's quite relevant to what I'm saying now. So this is a 1994 Harper Wolf rifle, of which there's a handful in existence. But the way it worked out is we felt that we needed a more conventional PCP, so we went back to Steve Harper and said, okay, what could we do? We felt that in a lot of ways, going to this deep system and all this sophisticated electronics had moved quite a long way away from the beauty of this little rifle. There's something about this which is just tiny, you know, 4.5, 5 pounds weight, just absolutely nothing to it. Yeah. So you can pass that round so people can have a look at it. Don't switch it on though, because it will fire. So you've got a tiny little gun, you know, with full power, and we felt that we'd lost that. And remember at the beginning of the talk I told you that that we started off using parts from the Huntsman Mark III. And because we were using parts, that basically gave development, and this guy wasn't going to give up on his development ideas. He had a concept of ideas he wanted to do in his design of Daystates, and he was going to stick to it. So a lot of the beauty of that tiny little rifle was lost when we moved across to the Huntsman Mark III parts.
Did that ever make production, or was that just a prototype?
Well, he made them when you wanted one. So if you went to his house and asked for one and paid him cash, he made it for you. You know, that's how it worked. I hadn't seen that, but that was 10 years old before I saw that gun. We were working on the pistol ones. So we went back to Harper, it's myself and James Edmondson, and said, okay, we want to go back to the beauty of this gun. And Pete Boxall, who's the design engineer at Boxall Edmondson, also felt that that was the way to go. So Daystate was doing its own thing and was very successful and fine. You know, we didn't want to do anything that they were doing or interrupt them in any way. But we felt that that had been left behind, and that's where we wanted to go at Sterling. So we had a planning meeting, and it was a bit like old times with old folks. In fact, I found myself at the planning meeting the youngest person in the room. It's a bit odd. We all got together again, and in about an hour we thrashed out what we needed to do a modern version of that. We all went away, we all did our little bits and pieces, and we met 2 weeks later to find 2 prototype rifles. One made by Steve Harper, and one made, thank you, by Pete Boxall. And I brought the Steve Harper one, because I thought it would be the most relevant one, here with me today. So this is the prototype that was produced from a planning meeting in an hour to 2 weeks later a production prototype gun, and that's the prototype. And you can see where we were thinking. Now, the gun has been developed since then, and the production gun is going to be ever so slightly different. Of course, I can't tell you what's going to happen, but it's smaller and lighter, shall we say. So we've gone to this concept into a small light gun. What we want, I've always been always in Planet of the Apes when they were on their horseback with those little guns. I always felt that was the way a gun should be, you know, just absolutely insignificant, just the tool to do the job, and not a big, heavy, gangly thing, you know, with all these bits hanging off it and stuff like that. So we went back to that, and everybody in the team, all 4 of us, agreed, and this is where we've gone to with this rifle. So 10-shot repeater, bolt action. There'll be a choice of different bolts which you can opt for. There'll be one with a walnut knob, there'll be one with a spoon lever, there'll be one with a thumb part, and there'll be all optional extras, so you can have what you like. Breech block has been made smaller, restyled, and is even lighter than this. And then you can have optional parts that go on the barrel, different stocks, different trigger guards, different trigger blades. All these things you can opt as extras on the basic gun. The basic gun, as it comes out of the factory, is somewhere around about £860 is the target price for us, and I think we're going to hit that. We might not make any money on it, but we'll go out, and then the accessories and the other bits and pieces will go onto that. So you'll have an electronic trigger. So it has a version of this trigger. So we've taken this system, worked out what we've known for the last sort of 15 years of development, and then redesigned it to go back into this. The electronics in this gun are in here. Electronics in this gun are in the stock. So they're all encased in the stock, batteries in there. It will come probably with 2 PP3 batteries for you. That should last you a couple of years. And if you don't want to have that, you take those out and you can put a rechargeable pack in there and you just have to recharge it.
Well, it caught me a pacemaker.
Yeah, we could do that as well, yes. So you've got, it's got a big area there to put big batteries in. That's what we wanted. We wanted it in a waterproof container so that it's not going to be interfere with there. So when you take the action out, you have to unplug the unit at the back.
You're not going to put that one in the pond, are you?
Eventually, yes.
Yeah.
There's canal just down there.
So that's the rough prototype. It's not a bad rough prototype, but
That's
it
nice.
gives us an idea of where we're
Right.
going. The block is completely filled in, so where the trigger cuts through on that one, it's all wood on the production one.
When are they expected to be on the market?
We're waiting for barrels. The metalwork parts are all ordered. They're in production now. I think they'll be done in days. Stocks are being made now, but we're still waiting for the barrel makers.
Who's making the barrels?
Well, we've gone for Walther for the first batches. We've found 4 companies that will make barrels for us, and we've got 2 of those are British. So we've decided to not have a problem with barrels in the first batches, and we're just going to do Walther barrels initially, and then we'll come on to a British barrel and make our own barrels later on.
So it'll be all British then?
And then it'll all be British, yeah.
Both calibre?
Both calibre, one's a 722, and eventually there'll be a 2.5 and a 3.0.
So you're making them for the American market as well, you are?
Absolutely, we've got an American distributor. Everything, I haven't had a really easy time with the sales pitch. Basically, I just have to answer the phone. Everybody wants it, and there hasn't been a problem. Did I mention about the tracking system that it's got built into GPS?
Yeah. You know it's got GPS.
What, for geocaching?
Is that different to what you had on the stand at the British?
No, I had that one on the stand.
Oh, that is the one.
That's the one.
Yeah.
Yeah, I went to the factory day before yesterday to see if I could grab a pre-production model, and the expression on their faces was basically a no. So I just bought the prototype.
I think a lot of people that went to the stand like John were spending time looking at the T16.
Yeah, well, I've got that here, so I'll come on to that. Yeah. That wasn't expected to be there. Who would expect in 4 weeks a gun that you talked about 6 weeks ago for the first time to be on a stand?
Yeah.
It's impossible. But when I said to them about 2 weeks before the show, I said, "Is that going to be on the stand?" Said, "Oh yeah." But how? Well, we'll just do it, you know. And they just, but you know, got to say, they were working all night, working weekends. You know, 2 people at Boxall Leveson working through the night to make the parts. Harper was pulling all night design exercises to get it right. And since that show, they've redesigned the gun. But not that it will change its looks, it just redesigned the internals. They felt that the trigger system was too complex. This has 100 parts in it. The Sterling version has about 4, and and they felt it was too complicated. So they
just electronic trigger, not the management.
It's got everything in there. It's got electronic management system, electronic trigger, but it doesn't. It's CDT. It's not got the capacitor. It's got a capacitor discharge, but it hasn't got the MCT system. The MCT system was patented for Daystate, so that can't be used by anybody else. The CDT system was developed for this gun in the early 90s, so the patents have all expired.
Yeah. What was the price of that?
Yes.
Better.
Better, yeah.
Not what?
Just it's easy.
You've
done it now.
Now, Okay.
I'm having a joke.
Got 2 different gas rams in it.
Hey, sit down.
Okay. So this is the what we're calling the T16 Trims 2016. So what the story of Sterling? It's a bit of it's you know, it's going to take about 3 hours to talk, so I'm not going to do that. But basically, what happened was that Daystate was making a gun for Bots and Evans, and it was a limited edition, and it sold okay, and I think Botsall sold more than anybody else. And at the end of it, they wanted to do some more, but it hadn't been such a success for Daystate, so they decided they weren't going to do any more. And they were a bit disappointed with that, so we're going to do off and do our own gun. And I saw a bit of a conflict there, and I said, okay, why don't you do a spring gun? And because that wouldn't get anywhere near Daystate, because Daystate doesn't seem to be interested in spring guns. I did do a presentation with Daystate and Harper and Rob Thompson at a pub in Gorcott on a spring gun once, and I was like 5 minutes into the presentation when I looked up from my notes at the sea of horrified faces that you know, I said, okay, we're not doing it. And they thought they'd upset me. They took the conversation into how they were going to do preheated systems and digital technology into a spring gun. I said, you haven't quite got the point that they need to be cheap. But we never went back and never examined it again. But when Sterling wanted to do an air gun, I suggested that they stay, because they were a conventional shotgun company, stay within convention, because 99% of the world market for air guns is spring piston air guns. So I felt by going into an upper market that would be a good bit of advice. And James went off and he found a designer called Graham Trim down in Devon, and James had been involved in the Park rifle, Park 91, many years before. He had one. He gave it to Graham and told him to improve it. And he basically got updates for every week for the next 2 years. Never saw the gun. And I assumed that it was never going to see the light of day. So about a month after I left Daystate, James rang me up and said, the trim gun, yeah, it's finished, I've seen it, I've shot it, it's great. I said, nah, it's fictitious. And he said, no, it's a real thing, I've shot it. So he got it up, got trim up to Botsall Evans, and I went down and met him, and this is the gun. Well, it wasn't quite this gun, very close to this. He had a carbon fibre stock on it, and it had a few other changes, but basically it was this gun, and he'd done it. And I said, Graham, how on earth do you spend 2 years working on a gun and suddenly out of the blue come up with it? And he said, basically I couldn't get it to work, so I gave up. And then my partner said to me, so what else have you got to do? And he went, good point, and went back and carried on with it and got it to work. And there's a revolutionary piston design and gas ram design in this to make it work, because about a year and a bit it wasn't working at all. It was getting power, but it wasn't getting enough power. The reason for that is the acceleration of 2 pistons reduces the power, so he had to do something clever with the airflow and the way that the piston design worked. And that's all being patented at the moment, so we can't go in until that's all settled. And that will have to be settled before we can sell an individual gun. But it's got that in there. It's not that complex. It looks complex. There's a lot of parts in it. As I said about Mozart, a lot of notes. But you've got a carbon fibre cocking handle here, and that's your complete cocking cycle. And then you open the breech, and you can access your
Is there a safety
pellet tray.
on that?
There is a safety catch. At the moment, I'll just close that down. The safety catch is there. It blocks the trigger. On the production one, there is a cantilever lock here, so it's controlled by gravity. So when this comes back, this little drops into it, and there's a little lever on the back here. And you press that down to be able to close the lever off. So it just locks into the catch at the back, stops it from going forward. What you don't want, at the moment, if I was to pull the trigger, that would fly forward, and you can't have that. So when you pull it back, it locks it to an anti-bear trap. But there's no auto safety. It's just part of that. It's also got an cock indicator from the rear piston, which comes up to let you know that the gun is cocked. And when you close it down, you can put the safety catch off and fire the rifle. That's all there is to it. We asked some trials on this with a cup of water on the breech block with a pellet in it, and it barely rippled. So with the gun being balanced properly, it's completely recoilless. The combustion pressures in there is using tiny amounts of air but at very, very high velocity. So it should get the pellets running quite quickly, so the air blast is almost nothing, so it doesn't really need much in the way of a silencer, and it does mean that the ballistic coefficient of the gun should be superior to PCP. So if the gun's running well and you've got a good shooter, potentially it should outshoot a PCP, because on paper it's got advantages that the PCP doesn't have. So what we're hoping is that spring gun aficionados will giant kill with this gun, much like the Wiscoms did in the late 80s, where they were able to take on for a very brief time the PCPs and beat them at their own game. Of course, you never need... Well,
in competition.
Yeah, because the people who run the things don't have them, so they get rid of them. That's more.
Well,
but at the moment, this could shoot in open competition, and it could actually, of course, shoot in field target. It could shoot in piston class. So
Yeah,
you can actually
recoiling.
take on a TX200.
Is that right? Wouldn't they put it into...
Well, they haven't at the moment, but watch this
I
space.
think in HFT there...
In HFT, they know. The HFT, you can't. Yeah, this would have to go up against a PCP. in
Yeah.
HFT. But in field target, at the moment, it's piston class, so you'd be all right.
Recoiling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But well, recoiling in HFT.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
it's recoiling
So
in both.
this is
isn't it?
non-recoiling, therefore it will go into the open class. That's, I mean, I'm not an expert and I haven't been doing those sports for a number of years, but speaking to people who have, that's how I understand it. So recoiling is HFT, and therefore this will not go into recoiling class, it will go into open.
Yeah.
And in field target, where they have piston class,
Yeah.
this has got a piston,
Yeah.
two of them,
Yeah.
so it will go into that class.
For about a week.
So there we go. So that's the rifle. That's in development at the moment. There's a simplification project going on at the moment, but it's been put back because the patents, and we've got quite enough to do with the pneumatic.
Just out of interest, is that right, one of the pistons is totally active and the other one is...
The other one's
connected,
dragged forward
but-
by the other piston.
So it's not, is the other one not compressing any air then?
Yes, it is.
Oh, it is?
But it's driven to drive forward, so they're both compressing air.
Is it on a pulley system though?
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cord not chained.
This one's got a chain. The production one has a cord. And cord is the right one. Okay, so there we go. One interesting sideline of this is Graham is a very strong-willed character, and he wanted to show it with the carbon fibre stock on it, which had cracked and he'd fixed. And I said, I'm not having a cracked and fixed stock on the stand, it'll make us look ridiculous. And at that point, this was the only gun which was going to be on the stand at the British Shooting Show. So I said, we're going to have to redo the stock. And Form Rifle Stocks is a British stock making company down not far from him. So he went down there and he developed a stock. And on the Saturday before the show, when we were setting up on the Thursday morning, I got sent a picture of this stock, and it looked like a paddle for a canoe or a kayak. And I rang him back and said, you trying to make me look really foolish, you know, because credibility is quite a lot in this industry. And if I turn up at Sterling on the first thing and produce something that looks like it should have been done by Chinook Cook, you know, we're not going to go down very well. And he said, well, I didn't think you'd like it. Those are famous last words. And I said, okay, well, I'm glad we agree. I need another stock. So he sent me some drawings, and this is Saturday. And I said, that one. And he then made it, and he delivered it to Graham on the Wednesday. He fitted it on the Wednesday afternoon. James picked it up from his house in Devon on the Thursday and brought it to me, and I got it for the show. Brought it to my house, and this was a stock. And fortunately, it looked an awful lot better. And I think we're going to stay with something like this.
Probably the best stock
No.
I've seen.
Yeah.
It really
But
is.
when you think that, for instance, the Airwolf stock was pretty much like this. I produced the Airwolf out of a bag, and all sorts of polite people went, oh, that's very nice, and then got home and said it was a bag of spanners and looked like crap and on the forums. And I'm like, you're right, it looks absolutely disgusting. And Gary Kane had 5 goes at getting that right, and he said, this is it. And in the end, we gave it to a graphic designer and said, okay, we've tried doing it from the stock maker, Now the graphic designer will do it, take this off, put that on, right now you stop, make that. And that's how we did it, and literally after all that development, it ended up with being done that way around. This is another example of things going wrong and coming out just at the last minute right, because the other one just didn't.
What are we looking about? What date are we looking at?
We think about October for this gun. And it's going to be later on in the
We've got to
year.
wait that long.
Dave's going to be drooling now. Let's get on go.
Christmas.
Right, so the final gun is that the whole point of doing something different to Sterling is to be doing something different with Sterling. It's not to do something which is mainstream. We are not going to take on Hatson, we're not going to take on Daystate, we're certainly not going to take on BSA with our production capacity. So we wanted to do things which are niche and different, and when you're doing very niche and very different, you can go up in the price of it because people who want it will pay for it, and if they don't, there's 1,000 other guns out there for them to buy. So while we were waiting for this, and in my view it was never going to happen, they developed a version of the Webley service rifle, and it was really done to see if a company called Cambridge Precision, who Boxall Epperson was subcontracting parts to, could actually make an air gun. And this is one of the air guns that they made. They made about 5 of them, and this one and another slightly more advanced version this is one of the first prototypes made. The beautiful machining and beautiful engineering, but not beautiful function. So there's been a lot of work done on it since to improve the function, but try not to lose the looks and beauty of it. And in production, when this gun comes out, it will be doing 11.5 foot-pounds, it won't be doing any more, 11.5, 12, touching 12 foot-pounds in 177 and 22, and will retain something like the looks of this gun. The only thing I can tell you is that to get the power up, they've had to lose this block. On the original Webley service, they worked on dieseling as a principle. So they basically used combustion of oil to get the power to 7 foot-pounds. Yeah. So they required a long transfer port to allow that expansion to take part. We can't use expansion of explosive in an air gun these days. Well, we can, but we wouldn't get away with it for long. So we've had to increase the design and development. This one has got parachute washer in there. It wasn't enough. Another prototype used a bigger tube, and that was the wrong direction. So the production one, they will shorten the transfer port down and have it coming, so the barrel will come back further, much like the pistols do. But that's the only major change to concession design. That will also mean that the dovetail will come back further, which is quite useful for if you wanted to fit a scope. I don't think you would, but if you wanted to fit a scope to this rifle. But the aim is that in other guises, this gun will be as good as, for instance, a TX. So the target is to make a beautiful retro-looking gun that will shoot like a TX. It could actually be better, because a TX200 is conventional Lincoln Jeffries design, where the piston goes forward, so you have a forward motion, followed by compression, followed by a backward motion. Apart from destroying scopes, that also means it's hold sensitive as you shoot, like that, like that, like that, kneeling, standing. You're changing your hold on the gun. And the skill in shooting spring piston air guns, as you probably worked out, as you got them, is consistency of hold. If you hold it tight when you're standing and then loose when you're on the bench, guess what? The pellets will go to a different place, because the recoil is happening while the pellet is still in the barrel. So its consistency of hold is one of the drawbacks. Probably on this range, somebody who's got a spring gun can easily shoot groups as good as any pneumatic. He might be able to do it better, but given a field target competition, he'll be mashed, won't he? Because he's got all the differences in hold and all the rest of it to contend with. That's what throws it. We're hoping on this gun, because the recoil is all backwards, because the piston flies back towards you, that the consistency of hold will be improved, because the recoil will be more constant, so it could potentially outshoot a conventional spring gun.
It's really a 24 mil spring.
That's right. They have a gas ram version as well,
Yeah.
but I think they're going to stay with spring initially.
How good will the trigger be on it?
This has got the standard Webley trigger, but with an adaptation to make it to second stage. The production one has an extra sear in there, so the trigger will be better. I don't know if it'll be CD trigger better or record trigger better, but it'll be it should be better than the standard trigger.
Is it going to replicate the original one as much as the interchangeable barrels?
No. Now that's something that comes up. If we are going to 11.5 foot-pounds, changing the barrels completely screws that up because you can't do anything about it. If we were going for 10 foot-pounds, we could do any number of barrels, and I think from the show everybody wanted interchangeable barrels, 2.5, 2.0, 177, but then I think they wanted the original gun. It might be that we will do a version which is using, because we're making all the parts, we could do two versions. We can do a retro, and then we can find out if anybody's actually going to buy it or just want to poke at it, look at it, or whether, but we are developing the gun to be a credible air gun in its own right, but also be a beautiful looking handling thing. There will be a 4-end extension, which is an optional extra that you can put on, so you can hold wood on that part, but we will stay within the, because there's something missing from the airgun portfolio when this gun left the field pre-war, wasn't there? It's still got something about it that's not there. So we've changed the lock-up, we've changed the design of the configuration, and it'll eventually come out in as a credible gun. But we'll try and keep the looks as close to the original.
Is that coming out in blued and silver like
It's
that?
going to be blued. I think that's the answer. Is that the feedback is that everybody in blue. If we do a silver version, we'll nickel plate a blued one. So we'll just offer it rather than stainless. Okay.
Have we got a date for that?
No. I really don't know. It'll be down to, this one will depend on how this one sells in production.
So all the rifles you got from Sterling then, is that all going to be done in the same factory? All the
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, they are. Yeah.
There's such a difference in each rifle, isn't
That's
there?
right. That's why we're going to do one stage at a time. That one first, that one second. This is a side project. The development and design people, that's two people really, and productionisation. They'll use modern production techniques, which is, they'll farm out parts to other engineering companies around the local Shrewsbury area, and those parts will come in and be made out of them. The working with Pete Boxall, I've got to say, has been an absolute revelation for me. Pete Boxall was a Jaguar car engineer, then moved as managing director to Holland & Holland, then did a couple of other jobs and has ended up at running Boxall Levinson. He's a proper design engineer, and listening to his simplification process to me has been, it makes me wonder what the hell I've been doing for the last 20 years, because it's really quite interesting to listen to his logic of putting these guns together and the logic of design. Because most of the Daystate guns, as beautiful as they are already the prototype made into production. This guy has started with proper design concepts and then made prototypes from there. So every single part on all of these guns is all drawn up and was designed on CAD, and then they've gone away and made the parts.
I bet he was lost at Boxall because the shotguns, let's face it, are so simple in comparison.
He's managed to make them quite complicated because they've used a lot of technology from other guns in there and redesigned themselves. But yes, they continue to develop the Boxall, but he hasn't really been doing anything like this. Didn't take him long though. It was, Thank you.
Yeah. How does that break down?
Just like the old one.
Just like the old one. Up. And then you cock it like that. This one's oversprung because this was a desperate attempt to try and get the gun to 12 foot-pounds. The other one with the bigger tube is undersprung because we thought somebody might fire at the shooting show, so we learned it not to destroy itself. But production one will have a reasonable cocking effort.